Cecil Rhodes, Prime Minister of Cape Colony. Cecil Rhodes, in full, Cecil John Rhodes, born July 5th, 1853, Bishop Stanford, Hertfordshire, England, died March 26, 1902, Mingsenberg, Cape Colony, now South Africa, financier, statesman, and empire builder of British South Africa. He was Prime Minister of Cape Colony 1890 to 96 and organizer of the giant diamond mining company De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited, 1888. By his will, he established Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford, 1902. Early struggles in financial success. Rhodes was the son of the vizier of Bishop Stortford, and the family roots were in the countryside, where Cecil Rhodes always felt at home. Tree planting and agricultural improvement were among his lifelong passions. Though his earliest ambitions was to be a barrister or a clergyman, his father was prosperous enough to send one son to Eton College, another to Winchester College, and three into the army. Cecil, however, was kept at home because of a weakness of the lungs and was educated at the local grammar school. Poor health also debarred him from the professional career he had planned. Instead of going to the university, he was sent to South Africa in 1870 to work on a cotton farm where his brother Herbert was already established. The farm in Natal was not a success. On his arrival, Rhodes found that his brother had already left the diamond field of Grocoland West. Although Herbert returned to the farm and his two brothers continued stubbornly trying to grow cotton for a year, the diamond fever eventually came to them. In 1871, they moved to Kimberley, the center of mining, where life was even harder than in Natal. Herbert was restless and stayed only until 1873, but Cecil's characteristic determination kept him at Kimberley off and on for years. For 8 years, until he took a belated degree in 1881, he divided his life between Kimberley and Oxford. Both societies found him odd, though he did miss his best to conform outwardly to the conventions at Oxford. His eccentric habits, falsetto giggle, rambling monologues, and unusual background intrigued the younger students around him. So did his philosophy of an almost mystical imperialism. He gradually advanced from being a speculative digger to the status of man of substance with ambitious ideas on the future of the diamond industry. His first partnership were with young men as impoverished as himself, such as C.D. Rudd, with whom he formed De Beers Mining Company in 1880. So called after the De Beers mining claims, many of which he had acquired. Eventually, success brought new friends and also rivals. Alfred Beat, a German who knew the diamond market intimately, was his most valued friend. With Beat's help, Rhodes expanded his claim until the De Beers mines were under his control. In 1887, he set acquiring the Kimberley Central Diamond Mining Company, which was also mainly controlled by Barney Barnato. A furious competition to buy up shares ended in Rhodes' fever in 1888, and Barnato agreed to merge his company with Rhodes' company, forming De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited. However, several minor shareholders in Barnato's company were not in favor of the planned amalgamation and tried to halt the merger in court, which found in favor of the shareholders. To work around the ruling, Barnato and Rhodes, who by then controlled most of the shares in Kimberley Central, liquidated the company. De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited then purchased Kimberley's asset for more than $25 million, which was paid out in part to the aggressive shareholders. Other lesser mines also fell under Rhodes' control until by 1891, De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited owned 9% of the world's production of diamonds. He also acquired a large stake in Transvaal gold mines, which had been discovered in 1885 and formed the Gold Fields of South Africa Company in 1887. Both Rhodes' major companies had terms in the Articles of Association allowing them to finance schemes of northward expansion. Political involvement in Africa. Rhodes never regarded money making as an end in itself. Painting the map red, building a railroad from Cape to Cairo, reconciling the Boers and the British under the British flag, even recovering the American colonies for the British Empire, were all a part of his dream. With those ideas in view, he first went into politics into 1881, offering himself for election to the Parliament of the Cape Colony in constituency in which he had to depend on Boer support. He held it for the rest of his life. Though unimpressive as a speaker and contemptuous of parliamentary procedure, he earned respect by his original views. He made friends with many Boer politicians. He espoused the cause of the Native Americans in what were Basto land and Becuna land, now Lesotho, and Botswana, and always he had his eyes fixed on the north. His first invention or intervention in the Native African policy came in 1882 when he was appointed to a commission to pacify the Basuto land after a minor rebellion. The rebellion had been put down by the former British governor of the Egyptian Sudan, Gen. Charles Gordon, acting for the Cape government. Gordon had succeeded not by force but by organizing discussion meetings with the tribal chiefs. Rhodes was impressed by the man and his methods, though less favorable by the contempt that Gordon showed for the financial reward. His determination to keep open a road to the north involved him in many disputes. Other imperial powers, the Germans, Belgians, and Portuguese, were in competition for the uncharted interior of Africa, as were the Transvaal Boers. The missionaries were, in Rhodes' view, overly solicitous of native African interests, and the Cape government was weak. And the British government, which he called the imperial factor, was too distant to understand his ideas, but he assiduously cultivated the government's representatives in Cape Town, particularly the High Commissioner of Sir Hercules Robinson, with profitable results. The crucial area was Becuna land, through which ran the route used by the missionaries. Rhodes intended to use it to open up the northern territories of Mash-on-Al and Metabelaland, both now in Zimbabwe. Rhodesia. Mineral wealth, communications, and eventually white settlement were his objectives. All the boundaries were unsettled, however, and many intrusions had to be frustrated first. Boers from the Transvaal trying to annex slices of Becuna land proclaimed two small independent republics and settled in Gossen. In 1882, a boundary commission to which Rhodes again secured appointment was sent to settle the boundaries of Griqualand West. Rhodes persuaded the commission to extend his mandate to the two small republics in 1884, when the Germans in southwest Africa, now Namibia, declared a protectorate over the two territories, which, along with Stellaland and Gossen, would have sealed off the Cape Colony from the north. He persuaded the High Commissioner that the British government must intervene. By the London Convention of 1884, The two republics were excluded from the Transversal, and the Cape government agreed to help finance the protectorate over Bechuana land. His settlement of Bechuana land question was also soon threatened, for the deputy commissioner in the new area of antagonized Boers. Rhodes insisted on his removal and was appointed in his place. He succeeded in consolidating Boers' settled land, but could not prevent Paul Kruger, president of the Transvaal, from declaring a protectorate over Goshen, from which he withdrew only after an expeditionary force was sent up from the Cape. In conference to settle the matter was held in February 1885 on the Vaal River, where Rhodes and Kruger met for the first time. Those two stubborn men, each determined to dominate Africa, each ever ready to quote scripture for his purpose, naturally failed to achieve in any meeting of the minds. Although Kruger was forced to give up Grosso, Rhodes did not get everything his own way. It was decided that southern Bechuana land should become a crown colony in northern Bechuana land to protectorate. Rhodes, who wanted both annexed by the Cape Colony, resigned in protest in March of 1885 and therefore devoted strenuous efforts both in Cape Town and London to secure the transfer of the colony to the Cape. Two men still stood in the way of Rhodes' plan for developing the North. One was Kruger, with his policy of Africa for the Afrikaners, the Boers. By the Franchise Law of 1890, he denied political rights to the Britons and other foreigners, Uitlanders, who had come to work the gold mines in the Transvaal. He also tried to extend Boers' control to the Mashonaland and Metabele land. The ruler of Metabele, Ndebele, was King Lob and Gula, Rhodes' second obstacle. Kruger had approached him for a treaty in missing consensus in 1887, and so had many others. Lob and Gula, however, knew that once he had the white men in, he would never see their backs. The only white men he trusted were missionaries, and Rhodes duly found in John Moffat, the son of famous missionary, a man to serve his purpose. Once Moffat, as his assistant commissioner for the Crown as assistant commissioner for the Crown Colony of Bechuana land, had in February 1888 persuaded Lob and Gula to sign an executive treaty of friendship. Rhodes sent 3 of his trusted agents to obtain a missing concession based on the treaty. The concession was extracted from the reluctant Lob and Gula in October 1888 to the last. He hoped he had only allowed the white men to dig a big hole. In fact, however, he had virtually signed away his kingdom, and Rhodes hastened to press the British government through the High Commissioner to grant a charter to a new company, the British South African Company, BSAC, to develop the new territory. In October 1889, the charter was granted, and Lob and Gula allowed the digging to begin. Queen Victoria found Rhodes' imperialism attractive, no less than his courtly rebuttal of the accusation of being a woman hater. How could I dislike a sex to which your majesty belongs to? The upshot of his successful propaganda was that the charter granted by the British government went far beyond the Lob and Gula had conceded. There was no northern limit on, and Rhodes intended to extend the charter company control to northern Rhodes, now Zambia, and Nyasaland, now Malawi, as well as to the Bechuanaland Protectorate, now in Botswana. In 1890, Rhodes pioneers began their hazardous march into Metabella and thence to Mashonaland, where they established a fort in September to be called Salisbury after the British Prime Minister. In the following year, Harry Johnson took over the administration of Nyasaland in a dual capacity as Commissioner of the British government and employee of the Chartered Company. Although eventually the protectorate reverted fully to the British government, Rhodes' influence was felt north and south of the Zimbabwe River, and soon the new territories was called by his name. Policies as Prime Minister of Cape Colony. In the meantime, policies as Prime Minister of Cape Colony. In the meantime, he had returned to his office in 1890, and the only post big enough for him as Prime Minister of Cape Colony. For 5 years, he proved a successful and imaginative Prime Minister. He acquired a property called Groot Shrew, which he rebuilt in the Dutch colonial style and bequeathed as official residence for the future prime ministers of the Union of South Africa. There he had lavishly entertained Dutch and British inhabitants of the Cape Colony and eminent visitors of all nationalities. Everything he undertook on a massive scale. Everything he undertook was on a massive scale. In Parliament, he cultivated the support of Afrikaner Bond without losing the goodwill of the British Liberals. His agriculture policies were sensible and effective. In Native African policy, he had moved cautiously. His Franchise and Ballot Act 1892 was passed, limiting the native vote by the financial and educational qualifications. The Glenn Gray Act 1894, assigning an area for exclusive African development, was a bill for Africa, as Rhodes proudly called it. In reality, it served to enforce segregation of native Africans, further disenfranchise them, and control their economic options. His main aim was to prevent the Dutch and British quarreling over such policies. To him, that involved the risk of mixing up the native question with the race question. He also sought to unite Boers and the British on northern policy. The prospects were good because Kruger's obstinacy alienated Cape Dutch. To ensure that commercial traffic did not have to reach Transvaal through the Cape Colony, Kruger had built railway to Delagoa Bay. Then in 1894 he closed the drifts or fords of the Vaal River to prevent the transports of goods by wagon, besides imposing heavy duties on Cape produce. Rhodes went to the Transvaal capital to protest, but in vain. Kruger was compelled to yield only after declaration by Rhodes' Attorney General that he was in breach of the London Convention, coupled with a threat by Joseph Chamberlain, who had become British colonial secretary in 1895 to support military expedition. Rhodes' patient had begun to wear thin. Rhodes' patient had begun to wear thin even earlier, partly because he knew his health was precarious and partly because he learned that the gold deposit of Transvaal were enormous, whereas those of Mashonaland were proving poor. His northern policy was encountering unexpected frustrations. The chartered company was in financial difficulties, its resources being overstretched. Although Rhodes' agent secured some new territories for the company elsewhere, he was forestalled. An Anglo-German agreement of 1889 gave a strip of land to Germany, cutting off the Bench-Una land from the north. The Anglo-Portuguese Convention of 1891 ended his hopes of eliminating Portugal from Africa. Harry Johnson proved uncooperative in administering Nyasaland. When Rhodes paid his visit to Rhodes in 1891, he found the pioneers in an angry mood. To pacify them, he helped them generously out of his own pocket. Serious trouble broke out in 1893, where Rhodes closed his friend B. Sack administrator. Lender Star Jamieson instigated an invasion into Lobengula's Metabele land under dubious pretense. A short, sharp war ended in total of defeat of the Lobengula and led to his death shortly thereafter. And pioneers streamed into Metabele land. Rhodes was then at the pinnacle of his achievement, but still the wider Union of South Africa eluded him. He was growing petulant and impatient and was visibly aging. By 1895, he was determined to settle accounts with the last obstacle, President Kruger. There was already talk of using force to remedy the grievances of the Unilanders. In the Transvaal, the Uitlanders formed a national union to support their cause. With Rhodes' brother Frank among its leaders, Kruger sought the support of Germany, and in 1895 he again closed the drift across the Vaal. Once more he was forced to withdraw, and by that time a conspiracy against him was underway. Rhodes knew about it and worked to actively foster it. Effects of Jameson's raid on Rhodes' career. Chamberlain was privy to the plan, but no one foresaw what actually resulted. The National Union of Johannesburg lost heart and decided not to act. Rhodes, the High Commissioner, Sir Hercules Robinson, and Chamberlain was all assumed that the plan had been called off, but Jameson recklessly decided to force the hand of the Uitlanders by invading the Transvaal zone. He launched the famous raid on December 29, 1895. It was a fiasco, his whole force being captured apart from a few killed. Rhodes was compelled to resign almost all his offices, not only in the Cape government but also in the Charter Company, because he refused to denounce Jameson. The raid was an almost complete disaster for Rhodes. Jameson and his colleagues were sent to prison. Kruger's power was consolidated, and Dutch and British colonies were more deeply split than ever, and Rhodesia and Bechuanaland were taken over by the imperial government. Only the charter was preserved, and Rhodes spent the rest of his life promoting developments in the north. He even won public sympathy. His last years were full of disappointment, both personal and political. Early in 1896, while Rhodes was in England, there was a serious revolt in Metabeleland. Rhodes returned by the way of Egypt and took an active part in suppressing the revolt. He finally brought to an end by holding a peace conference. On that occasion, Rhodes found the site, Matopo Hills, that he called the view of the world, and chose it for his burial place. His last years were soured by an unfortunate relationship with an aristocratic adventuress, Princess Radziwill, who sought to manipulate Rhodes, and Sir Alfred Milner, to the High Commissioner in South Africa and the Governor of the Cape Colony, and even Lord Salisbury, the English Prime Minister, to promote her ideas of the British Empire. Rhodes was unused to scheming women, nor could the young bachelor surrounding him protect him from her. She forged letters and bills in exchange in his name, and was finally sent to prison, but not before she had caused him much annoyance and scandal. In 1901, while he was in Europe, he was recalled to Cape Town to give evidence at her trial. His last political act on his return was to support Milner in suspending the constitution of the colony until the South African War, which broke out in October 1899, was over. He was, however, already dying of an incurable heart disease. Before either the war or Princess Radziwill's trial was over, he died. His last journey through Africa in the funeral train to the Matopo Hills was a triumphal procession. Legacy. The actions of Rhodes in his B-sack forever changed the face of South Africa. The actions of Rhodes in his BSAC forever changed the face of southern Africa and the lives of its inhabitants. He built a large empire in South Africa, but in doing so, he disregarded the rights of the people, the natives, as he referred them, already living on the lands that he claimed. Rhodes' treaties with the various African chiefs tended to be on the dubious legality, and he routinely pushed against or ignored established boundaries with other European colonial powers, which sometimes put him at odds with Britain's Foreign Office. Some of the legislation passed while he was Prime Minister of the Cape laid the groundwork for the discriminatory apartheid policies of South Africa in the 20th century. A legacy of different nature was revealed when Rhodes' will was read in April 1902, detailing an imaginative scheme of awarding scholarship at Oxford to young men from the colonies and from the United States and Germany that appealed to the public instinct for a more disinterested kind of imperialism. Most of his fortune was devoted to the scholarships. As for the will forbade disqualifications on grounds of race, many non-white students have benefited from the scholarship, though it is doubtful that such was Rhodes' intention. He once defined his policy of equal rights for every white man south of Zimbabwe, and later, under liberal pressure, amended white to civilized, but he probably regarded the possibility of Native Africans becoming civilized as so remote that the two expressions in his mind came to the same thing.